Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. If you notice, I'm on a totally different location. I'm on the road visiting customers and clients, and it feels weird because after 2 years of not being able to travel with uh, now with all the not all, but some of the restrictions have been lifted, it just feels weird to be traveling again. And I'm just kind of excited, although I'm still cautious. I'm still taking care of my health because that's priority. And it just feels weird that I'm on the road again and traveling. And this week's topic is something that is very familiar to us. I'm going to put the banner there. And it also feels weird because most of the time I do these with my computer. Now it's on my phone. I got like reach onto this and make sure that I know how to use all the controls. Anyway, the topic of this week's episode is all about what to do when you have too many incidents in your HA environments. There's a reason why I call it the Practical SQL Server HADR show, because I want it to be as practical as I possibly can. So you can take away a lot of insights you can immediately apply to your environments. And there's a difference between incidents in a standalone instance of a SQL Server database versus a high availability solution. But first, before we dive into that, let us first have a definition between what a problem is and what an incident is. So an incident is simply a one-time thing. It happens once, right? But then when it does happen, it's catastrophic, right? And a problem is something that could happen on a regular basis, and they're the ones that lead up to an incident. I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say you have a standalone SQL Server instance, and you have your database log files on a separate drive, let's just say, and that drive becomes full. When your database files, or rather database log files, inside a drive can no longer extend, autogrowth can no longer kick in because the drive's already full, your database will be switched in simple recovery, well, not simple recovery, read-only mode. Why was I thinking simple recovery? But the database would be switched to something similar to a read-only mode. No more transactions can occur until you create a space for your log files to grow. That could be considered as a problem, right? Because no big deal. Their databases are still accessible. You just cannot write into or make modifications to the data. In contrast, when your databases are in an availability and the log file, same instance or same problem, the log file drive, the log drive, the disk that contains your transaction log files become full, and your databases are no longer available for transactions, not only will it cause the database to become readable, right, no more transactions, it could also trigger a failover, which could be an outage. And the worst part of that is if the failover target also does not have enough space on disk to allow the transaction log to grow, then you have a complete outage, and it would take some time for you to kind of manage that. So just differentiating between incidents and problems. Incidents are a one-time thing, and when it does happen, it could be catastrophic. Whereas problems, small issues that could potentially lead to an incident, and sometimes, combination, perfect storm could lead perfect storm with all of these different problems happening could potentially lead to an incident. It's one of the reasons why you really have to pay attention to the issues, small issues, problems that can occur in your environment, so that they don't lead to incidents. And part of being in IT operations as a SQL Server DBA, or anybody who's managing a SQL Server high availability solution, it's just a fact. You cannot eliminate incidents. You never know, right? You'll never know when the perfect storm would hit. You'll never know when something would break, even if you put in all of the effort, all of the resources to design a highly available solution. It's not a question of if something happened, it's just a question of when. All we're simply doing is minimizing incidents. And the reality is when you're dealing with so many incidents, there's just so many things going on that it starts to affect your life. What do I mean by that? Well, when all you do is manage incidents, like one incident after another, and I remember when I was working as an operational DBA, or even when I was working as a data center engineer, we had monitoring systems in place that would create a ticket when it identified an issue, create a ticket, and then it will categorize it based on whether it's a severity 1, severity 2, or severity 3, and then we start looking at how we can address these. Because one thing is what it's one thing to handle issues, it's another thing to make sure incidents don't happen. And like I said, when you're dealing with too many incidents, it feels like you're always in an emergency mode. I mean, think about that for a second. If this is a severity 1 issue, what's your natural response? Your natural response would be, yeah, in fact, deer in the headlights sometimes, because if you're not familiar with what the incident is, then you go scrambling around it. The thing is, when you're in an emergency mode situation, like several incidents happen or several tickets were opened as a side effect of having a major incident, and they're all assigned to your queue, you become more like a doctor in an ER where you're triaging. And in that situation, you are hyper alert because you don't know. Maybe another incident or another problem would happen as a side effect of this. And you're constantly thinking about this, incidents after incidents and problems are at the back of your head. While you're trying to solve a problem, you're still thinking of what other incidents are happening. And this puts you in a fight or flight situation. Now, that's okay if it's not common, meaning you only do it once or twice a week, hopefully not once or twice a week, even less frequent than that. But when you're constantly in a fight or flight situation, it starts to affect your health and your sanity. Believe me when I say that, because again, having 25 email alerts come in from multiple sources because an incident just happened and you don't know which one to focus on can really cause a lot of issues on your sanity, on your ability to solve problems. And it also increases stress levels. I mean, imagine a situation where you had an outage, an extended outage it was an unplanned outage, and you're in your cubicle trying to fix that outage or mitigate or resolve that issue, and then you have your boss walk behind you, looking behind you and asking, when is this coming back online? Give me a status update. What is going? And that prevents you from even thinking about what you need to do because somebody, and of course you can't push them aside because they're expecting a result. They're expecting a response from you, an update. Like I said, it's a high pressure situation that prevents you from being creative with your problem solving, which makes matters worse because instead of you being able to solve the problems immediately, you end up scrambling, being uncoordinated. And this is just, again, a side effect of having and handling too many incidents. Imagine getting a page or an alert at 4 o'clock in the morning. I used to say 3 o'clock, but I decided to change it to 4. And you're still asleep, and all of a sudden your phone rings, and you have to wake up and deal with that incident. Not a problem, but an incident. And you're the lead engineer, and you have to deal with it, right? And then people are expecting responses from you. Again, it already broke your normal sleep pattern. It disrupted that, and you can't focus. It would take, probably 3 cups of coffee and being able to open up your PC or your laptop, connect to the VPN before you can even do meaningful work. And the worst part of this is when you did not address an incident, it could potentially lead to an RGE. Back in the days, I don't even know what an RGE was. Resume generating event means it's so bad that you now have to start looking for a new job. And I've seen cases where an incident caused an RGE to the lead person or whoever's responsible for it. And you have to know what to do when you have too many incidents, because the goal when you have a high availability environment is to provide a stable, reliable, reliable, highly available system so that you minimize incidents from happening. We want to provide high availability. We want to minimize downtime. And in order for us to do that, we have to reduce the incidents from happening. So if you're ready, get your pen and paper ready, right? Take notes. Here are 3 reasons why you have too many incidents. And I would like to look at the root cause, because looking at the root cause allows you to address the problem at its core, addressing the root cause rather than symptoms. So these are the 3 reasons why you have too many incidents. The first one, make sure you're taking notes, is that different teams and different people have different definitions of what stability and reliability means. I'll say that again. Different teams and different people have different definitions of what stability and reliability means. Imagine an IT team where you have the DBAs, the sysadmins, the network admins, and because of these boundaries, I want to say boundaries because even though we work within the same IT team, we have our own silos or some teams within teams. In a high availability environment, you have a lot of moving parts. Like for instance, in an availability group, the SQL Server DBAs are responsible for the databases in SQL Server. The Windows sysadmins are responsible for the operating system. They're probably responsible for the available cluster. Maybe they're also responsible for Active Directory and DNS. And then you have your networking team. They're responsible for making sure that the network is stable and reliable as well. Now, the thing is this. Your Windows team might have a different definition of what stability, what reliability means for them. Your network team might have a totally different definition of what stability, what reliability means to them. This reminds me of a client that I worked with a couple of years ago where they have segregation of duties. The DBAs are responsible for the databases, and the Windows sysadmins are responsible for the failover cluster and the operating system. And as I was building the availability group, I noticed that the file share that they configured as a witness was having intermittent issues. And there was a ton of events in the Windows event log that tells me that there was something wrong with the file share. And I asked the Windows sysadmins, hey, do you mind fixing this? Because it will impact the availability of not just the available cluster, but also the databases in the AG. And they said, sure, we'll fix it. I remember I had to get that on email just to make sure that they know, and we have a record that the conversation even existed. But here's the thing though, for the Windows sysadmins, it's just a file share. It is just a file share. The way I look at it, no, it impacts the availability of the SQL Server availability group databases because it's sitting on a failover cluster, and that file share can spell the difference between maybe a network blip or an entire outage. Guess what happened? Somebody made a decision to reboot the secondary, and this is a 2-node Windows Server failover cluster with 2 replica AG. Somebody decided to reboot the secondary AG as part of a maintenance window. Because the file share witness was unstable, it took the entire thing down. Now, the database administrators can't really do anything about that because, one, it's not in the scope of what they are responsible for. The problem is that the Windows sysadmins have a different definition of what stable, what reliable is, and it's not consistent with what the DBA's definition is. And that's the thing about having different definitions, because again, with the Windows team have their own guidelines on building the Windows operating system, and they have their own means of making sure that what they're doing is providing stability and reliability to the infrastructure. Just the fact that different teams have different definitions of what stability and reliability means contributes to increased incidents. That issue could have been dealt with, that could have prevented the issue from happening. It took them about 4 hours to, fix it, because that was the only time that they reached out to me for me to step in and fix the problem. But the thing is, because different teams have different definitions of what stability and reliability means, it led to that outage. The solution, just have a standard. Have a standard of what stability and reliability mean as far as your HA solutions are concerned throughout the entire IT team, for the network team, for the Windows team, or for the sysadmin team, and for the DBA team. That way, if a problem occurs, they know how to treat it properly to prevent an incident from happening. Again, the goal is for us to minimize incidents. Make sure that our HA solutions are highly available, reliable, stable, and resilient. We definitely don't want to be in a fight or flight mode all the time, stressing incidents. So that's the first one. Different teams have different definitions of what stability and reliability means, and the solution to that is just standardized. Okay? The second thing is not having a proper change management process. If you've seen and you've watched a lot of my previous videos, I'm huge on change management process. And the thing about this is, the more change or the more changes you introduce to a system, the more risks you're introducing. Because for one, well, it behaved one way when these are all the only changes I've had, and then now I'm introducing one more. Unless we've tested that, we're not sure what the impact is. And when you're introducing these risks, you are also causing instability to the system. And a lot of people would say, well, we have a different environment. We need to roll out changes on a regular basis. Like, people talk about DevOps a lot, and they're trying to push these changes to production environment faster, more frequent. And people talk about agile. There's nothing wrong with that, except we prioritize rolling out changes more than we prioritize stability and reliability. I mean, what's the point of having to release code on a regular basis? What's the point of introducing a lot of these deployments at much faster rate if your system is offline as a side effect of it? I remember one time when a client of mine had a developer who just rolled out code in production. And the goal of that code is to improve the performance. I think it was a stored procedure change, and because they were in an availability group, a stored procedure change was needed in order to improve query performance. That was an emergency change plus some indexing, not realizing that they only needed for month-end reports. You know how it is. You have a ton of transactions going on, and then month-end comes and you have reporting requirements. And because it's a one-time thing, it only happens once a month. You would roll out the change, and then you address the need for increased reporting performance. But then, come first day of the month, you no longer need that because your requirements. They forgot to roll back the change, and then all of a sudden the regular transactions are now affected. Not Having a proper change management process would introduce more risks. And, especially when we're dealing with emergency changes, how many actually document those emergency changes? I mean, we're pretty bad. Technology professionals are pretty bad as far as documenting and taking note of every change that we've made. So imagine introducing a ton of these changes, but not being able to document it. Well, documentation in itself allows us to replicate whatever it is you're doing. So imagine the problem. You want to roll out these changes faster, more frequent, but then you cannot keep track of what those changes are in order for you to even document them, right? You want to minimize the changes that you're introducing, because the more change you introduce, the more risk is being introduced to the system, and it becomes unstable. There was a conversation a couple of years ago about choosing between a file share witness versus a disk witness for configuring a witness for a failover cluster. A lot of the old school failover cluster experts would say, just go with a disk witness, because now you have a centralized copy of your cluster database. And my take on that was, how frequent are you actually making changes to your failover cluster? Because if you're making regular changes to your failover cluster, you're doing it wrong. You are supposed to not introduce as much change, because you want to prevent incidents, and you want to prevent issues from happening. So that's the second reason. Not having a proper change management process in place introduces more incidents. How do you deal with that? The solution to that, just come up with a change management process. Problem with that is, of course, in a very fast-paced environment where you cannot even keep track of the change you're introducing, it is very challenging to even have one in place, especially for large organizations where you have segregation of duties, not to mention in a high availability solution or in a high availability environment, just keeping track of the things you have in place. And here's the thing as well. If you were handed off an environment, let's say a consultant came in and he designed everything, he built everything, and now it's deployed to production, it leads, and you're now responsible for taking care of it. Where's the documentation? How do we even know that what you did was right? And all of these things need to be considered when you're working with your own change management process. There is no substitute to that. I kind of tell people all the time, when developers say, but it worked in my staging environment, not realizing that the staging environment does not look exactly like the production environment. That's where change management process makes everything possible, right? So first reason why you have too many incidents is that different teams have different teams and different people have different definitions of what stability and reliability means. What do you do with it? Just standardize. Have a standard definition across the board of what is considered to be stable and reliable. Okay. The second reason is that you don't have a proper change management process. And because of that, anybody can just introduce changes to the system, and you don't get to keep track of what those changes are. And the more change you introduce, the more risk you introduce, the more instability you introduce to the system. Number three is even more important. And this is the lack of proper skills to deal with SQL Server high availability solutions. Again, there's a big difference between knowing and doing. And I kind of use the analogy of what happened to me back in 2017, where I broke my right leg. And it would be scary to think about this, that as I'm going through the operating room, the doctor would come in and say, hey, I'm so-and-so. It's my first day on the job, and I'm an intern. I have no clue what I'm doing, but please come right in. I'm going to do a surgery on. That's kind of scary. But there's so many times that I've seen in my customers' environments where The DBAs, the sysadmins, they're being given responsibilities to manage, or well, start with designing, implementing, and managing these SQL Server high availability solutions, yet they have no clue at all what it is, how it works, what the configuration settings need to be, and that's scary. Not to mention, of course, because it's a high availability solution, there is this potential risk of an outage, which could also lead to loss of revenue. Again, I remember a client of mine from 2 years ago who was in the right spot. He was a senior DBA, but he's never dealt with an available group solution. And he was tasked, his manager gave him the responsibility to build an always on available group solution. In my view, this platform is responsible for generating, I believe, about $100,000 to $200,000 per day. Per day. Do the math, how much they're losing if, let's say, the system was down for like an hour or 2 hours. And he was so scared to a point where I don't really know what to do. And that's the thing. There's a big difference between having information versus having the skills to do what you need to do. I mean, with all the internet resources out there, you do a quick Google search, type in the keyword, and you find exactly what you're looking for. I was just looking at Stack Overflow earlier today, where I saw a lot of the questions that are being asked. And the one thing that I noticed is that when there's already a response to a question that has been asked in the past, they would refer to it, not realizing, oh, the one with this much number of votes didn't really work out for me. And the thing is, we're simply looking for resources and information just so we can get by in designing, implementing, and managing a high availability solution. Here's the challenge. How sure are you that what you're doing is actually right? Are you confident that when you were given the responsible to design an availability, for instance, and you roll it out in production, how sure are you that you didn't miss a critical config? How confident are you that when it goes down, you have the right skills, you have the right capabilities, you have the right information in order to address an outage? Like I said, it's kind of a scary thing when I start to think about me going to an operating through a surgery and realizing that my surgeon is an intern and it's his first day at work. Same thing with managing these high availability environments. You need to have the proper skills. You need to have the right information from the right source. And it's tempting because, like I said, go to your favorite search engine, type in keywords. You'll find information that you're looking for. The question is, how reliable is that? Even when you're directed to the Microsoft documentation, how sure are you that this is exactly what you're looking for? One of the things that I struggle with the documentation is that there's just so many of them. It's so confusing that I just need to know how to do one thing and I have to read like 40 pages of documentation. Come on. I just want to get my job done. And imagine a situation where you have an incident, an outage situation. Your failover cluster is offline. Your availability group is offline. You're not sure about what you need to do. You are scrambling to figure out what the next step is. It's, 30 minutes have passed and you still have no clue at all what you need to do. You get a phone call from your manager or your CIO asking, what's the update? How long can you address this? That is a resume generating event waiting to happen. And this is one of the reasons why I emphasize so much on having the proper skills to to make sure that you can get the job done. I mentioned that incident that happened to a client of mine a couple of years ago where it took down their entire availability group, and it took them about 4 hours to try to figure things out and address what the issue was. Their DBAs couldn't couldn't figure out what was going on because it was outside the scope of what they're doing. The admins were trying to figure out what is really causing the problem. And when they called me, I knew exactly what the problem was. It took me 5 minutes to bring the cluster online, then brought the availability online. And that's also the difference between dealing with an incident that could take hours versus minutes. It can literally transform the way you do your work. And the goal is to minimize incidents, not to avoid them, not to eliminate them at all costs. Again, it's not a question of eliminating incidents. They're going to happen. It's just it's a question of when. It is going to happen. It's inevitable. Even if you put in all of the time, the effort for planning and making all the config changes, stabilize everything, it's just inevitable. Question is, how prepared are you when those incidents start to happen? And that's why I really want to focus on trying to look at the root cause. What is the reason? First one, like I said, different teams and different people have different definitions of what stability and reliability means. All you have to do is just standardize. Right? The second one is not having a proper change management process. I'm huge in change management process. Even if you talk about DevOps, even if you automate things, have a proper change management process in place, and not just any change management process, but something that allows you to roll back in case something happens. People just roll out changes, not thinking about what would happen if this wasn't successful and I needed to roll back. Have that in place. Don't just roll out changes, put it on your change management system. Treat that as a project and make sure that you have a proper rollback process as well. Finally, the lack of proper skills to deal with high availability solutions the way they need to be dealt. If you want a stable, reliable, highly available SQL Server environment, you can't leave it to chance. You want to minimize incidents from happening. You want to minimize the issues that could lead to incidents. And these are the three things you need to do in order to stabilize your environment. The point where a lot of my clients would say, don't even remember we have an AG until next month, because we have to install cumulative updates. But other than that, it's stable, it's reliable, it's highly available. We can go on doing the other things that we need to do, other than just having to deal with incidents after incidents after incidents, and they don't know what to do. And that's key. It is key to providing a stable, reliable, and highly available SQL Server environment. And I talk about all of these incidents that are happening because it's just a part of our day-to-day as people working in tech. And the thing about this is, unless you are prepared to handle these incidents, it literally could be a resume generated event. So if you need any help working with a SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery environment, maybe somebody designed it and you have no clue at all how it works. Maybe you're in a position where you're just starting out, but then you're given this responsibility to build an always-on availability or even available clustered instance. Maybe you're struggling with trying to prevent more incidents from happening because it has literally taken over your life, and you want to get back to having a normal, maybe normal hours of sleep so that you don't get called and paged in the middle of the night. If that's what you want, I want to invite you to book a call with me. Let's have that conversation. Use that link on the screen, schedule a call, and this will direct you to my calendar page where you can pick a time that works for you. We're going to talk for about 45 minutes to an hour. We'll have a look at your environment. We'll look at your capabilities are. We'll evaluate what's working, what is not working. And at the end of it, you're going to have a step-by-step strategy on what you need to do to take action to minimize the incidents from from taking over your life and having, again, a reliable environment so you can do more of what you need to do. Use that link on the screen, schedule a call, and let's have a conversation. I can guarantee you that 45 minutes to an hour worth of conversation is going to be more valuable. You get a ton more out of that compared to months and even years of doing your own research. That's how important it is to get the information and the resources from the right people, from the people who have done it so many times that it feels like normal to them. I remember looking at some of the incidents where people will freak out when they experience incidents because they've not done it ever. It's their very first experience. They have no clue how to respond. And with the right people in place, I'm like, it's just Tuesday. No big deal. What seems to be a challenge for you is normal for somebody else, and they know exactly how to deal with it. So use that link on the screen, schedule a call, and let's have that chat. I look forward to speaking to you on one of these strategy sessions. All right. And that is about it for this week's episode of Practical SQL Server HADR Show. Tune in again next week for another topic. And if this is something that's been valuable to you, I highly recommend you rewatch the recording. The recordings will come out immediately after this stream ends. Rewatch the recording, right? Take as much notes as you possibly can because this will revolutionize your day-to-day operations. And you could suggest the recommendations to your Windows team, your backup team, or network team, your sysadmin team, to for everybody to be a part of this. Because one thing that I emphasize is that managing a high availability solution is not a one-man sport. It's a team sport, and you need the right people to know exactly what to expect. All right. And that's about it for this week. I will see you again next week. Enjoy the rest of your, I can say weekend, it's Friday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you again next week.